Now, the BuckeyeXtra podcast with Joey Kaufman and Rob Oller from the Columbus Dispatch.
Hey everybody, this is Joey Kaufman. I'm joined by Rob Oller. It's the week of the Ohio State spring game. The Buckeyes have gone through 13 practices as of our recording of this on April 16th. The spring game will be Saturday, April 18th, and sort of give us a real chance to see these guys in person. We saw two practices during the first week of spring practice. We saw a student appreciation day practice, so this will be our fourth chance to see the Buckeyes practice this spring, and a lot of new faces, 51 newcomers. They are going, in terms of what the script for the spring game is going to look like, it will be a fairly traditional spring game, at least as far as the day era concerns. They are going to have thud tempo for a series or two, i.e. that'll probably be the starters. And then for the rest of the roster, they will progress into live tackling, largely the first team offense, first team defense, second team offense. It'll be offense versus defense rather than splitting the team up into Team Buckeye against Team Brutus or Team Scarlet or against Team Gray, something of that iteration. It'll be primarily offense, defense, which is typically what they've done because they want to sort of have some of the same packaging that they would normally do in a real game. So I think it's a little more productive for them. So that's sort of what we'll get to see. And Rob, you looking forward to anything in particular on Saturday?
Yeah, hopefully good weather, although I saw the forecast as possible thunderstorms. The spring game, spring scrimmage, spring practice, really game is a reach. But for a lot of people, I know a lot of young fathers with kids who this is their opportunity to, plunk down, I think $10, unless you want premium seating. I think it jumps up, I don't know what, to 15 or 20 or something, maybe 50. To come to, you can't afford a game during the season anymore. That gets pretty pricey. So the spring game's an opportunity to go see your heroes for a lot of these kids, whether it's Jeremiah Smith or Julian Sayin, who I can't imagine will see a lot of action. Do you think the thud portion of the scrimmage, which for those who don't know, thud is just kind of, you're not tackling, you're just kind of thudding a guy, you're hitting a guy. Yeah, you're just, don't take him to the ground, I think is probably what thud is.
It's more, I think they should call it wrap, because I think it's what it is. You're just wrapping them up. You're not bringing them to the down.
And again, the problem with that is, of course, they want to spin it like it's real football. Thud sounds tougher than rap. Rap is like, thud is like, you're giving them a little shot there.
Yeah.
But regardless, is Jeremiah Smith going to even go beyond thud? I would kind of highly doubt that, like, the superstars they won't be involved in live tackling. Will they?
I would guess not, but I would think they would also want to at least get him out there for a series, but that might be the thud series.
Yeah.
But hey,
let me ask you.
You got 10,000 of people in the horseshoe. I think it'd be, I'm sure for a lot of those folks, you want to see Jeremiah Smith maybe get to do something.
How many you said?
10,000? Tens of thousands. I wasn't going to.
Okay, tens of thousands. Yeah, I was going to say if it's a thunderstorm, may only be 10,000, but they'll get more than that. No, they get like 25 regardless, feels like.
Yeah, I would guess they get more than last year, which was the lowest in quite a while.
Yeah. Maybe.
Last year was just a touch over 40,000, but that was partly because they didn't market last year's as a spring game until late in the spring. They talked about it being a spring showcase. It was going to be more of a condensed spring after the championship run went into late January. They've been pretty clear in terms of the promotion of this event that it'll be a spring game.
It's always curious which player who a lot of people don't know about will step forward and will become, oh, this guy's going to be a star in the, as we call it, the Bam Childress player. Who Bam Childress, for those who don't know, was a receiver I think he was slot. He might even been a running back. That's how much I remember him. He was a great guy, but he stood out in the spring game and then like played like 5 or 10 plays during the regular season. And famously, when we talked to him after the spring game, he says, Where'd that come from?" And he says, "I'm the Bam man. I'm the Bam man." Bam Childress. Again, he was a great guy. But that is the spring game sort of, I don't know, historical note is you get these asterisks of guys who really flash, as Ryan Day likes to say, in the spring game, and people get excited and say, "Hey, that could be the guy," and then it ends up not being the guy. So
Yeah, you
that's
could
just that's a cautionary tale for those who flash. Now maybe they will turn into superstars, but not always. I guess that's my way of saying enjoy the day. Don't put too much stock in it.
Yeah, you could probably do a column, or we could do a podcast that was almost exclusively on your spring game all stars, guys who really popped on a Saturday afternoon in April and were sort of never heard from again.
Yeah,
There
yeah,
much ink has been spilled over players like that over the years.
yeah. All right. Speaking of, you said 51 new players. You were there all spring. You saw these practices. Who do you think has stood out? And going into the spring game, what are you sort of most interested in seeing?
I think you have to look at this spring game almost like a 7-on-7 showcase in some ways. They're really limited at running back right now. I think they're probably only going to have two available scholarship players available for the spring game. That's Favor Key, who's a freshman from Delaware County, and then you have Jacoby Jackson, who's a veteran transfer from Florida. The rest of them are out. So if you were looking to see Legend Bay, who's certainly, I think, been of intrigue because of the versatility that he brings. Is he a receiver? Is he a running back? He played quarterback in high school and wanted to sign with Tennessee before he ended up at Ohio State. And Ryan Day has sort of compared him to Tyreek Hill light. And Carlos Lachlan has talked about his running style is like art. And well, you're not going to really probably get to see him because he's been managing with a hamstring injury. So that's sort of a little bit of a letdown or a bummer from our end. So it's going to be passing. So I think a lot of the receivers are going to be interesting. A lot of the defensive backs are going to be interesting. I think some of the pass rushers are going to be interesting because they're going to have a chance to tee off. Maybe it's they're not going to be running the ball as much, and so I think those matchups become a little more interesting. The defensive ends against the tackles. So somebody like Quay Rusaw, the transfer from Alabama, is really interesting to me. He didn't have a ton of production in Alabama. He had dealt with a broken foot last year, but sort of began the year as a starter for the Crimson Tide and started 3 games and flashed a little bit, had made an impact against Georgia and Wisconsin before he got hurt. He's a more compact build than a lot of Ohio State's defensive ends are. He's 6'2", 245, and most of their DN tend to be 6'5", 260. So he's a little more compact, but Larry Johnson describes him as very powerful. He creates a lot of speed despite the smaller size. So he's somebody I think could be in some interesting matchups and sort of trying to assess his quickness. It'll be a big day for somebody like Ian Moore potentially because of the injuries on the offensive line they've had this spring. Philip Daniels and Austin Searville have been out with some minor procedures in the back half of spring. Ian Moore, left tackle, has got a chance to try to prove himself as maybe being the final piece for their offensive line. They only have one open starting spot, and that's a right guard. But if Ian Moore plays well enough here in the spring game and in the fall camp, he can kind of build a case to be a starter, and maybe that pushes Searville or Daniels inside. So he's another one to watch. I think those isolated matchups, tackle, defensive end, are going to be worth watching. And then you have the receivers and DBs, and certainly the receiver position has been really interesting this spring because you have Jeremiah Smith, But outside of that, they do return Brandon Inniss in the slot, but there's almost no returning production outside of those two guys. And you have a large cast of playmakers. They've actually talked about that room being deeper this year. And part of that is they brought in some transfers and Devin McEwen and from UTSA and Kyle Parker from LSU. Two freshmen have really shown up. Brock Boyd from South Lake Carroll in Texas, and then Chris Henry Jr., who was the top-ranked wide receiver. Henry was the one who everybody sort of drew all the intrigue and buzz, the son of the late Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver Chris Henry, and was the top guy at the position. The Buckeyes had to hold on to him during the early signing period after Brian Hartline left for South Florida and took that head coaching job. But Boyd was the first freshman to lose his black stripe, and the son of a coach, a longtime Texas high school football coach, and a really precise route runner. So he's been sort of at the advanced stage for a freshman, and just how does he kind of maybe pop on this stage in the student appreciation practice? I wouldn't say either of them were stars from what we saw. We didn't see the whole deal, but this will sort of, I guess, cast a little bit of a wider lens for us to see those two. And Henry did lose his black stripe this week. I think that's somebody they have still been impressed by, even though maybe Boyd has sort of been the unexpected surprise. He was only a 3-star recruit, but he's sort of been the talk of spring to some degree. And then Henry, I think, has sort of come along as well and sort of lost his black stripe, which is a good benchmark for somebody that they have high hopes for.
He's the Boyd, man.
Yeah. I mean, like I think they are potentially deeper at receiver, because I think in some ways they weren't deep last year. And I think that's both maybe a compliment to this year's group and also maybe a little bit of a diss on last year's, because remember that Rutgers game before Michigan where Tate and Smith were out, and it felt like they had no options at receiver outside of Brandon Inniss. It was a lot of Max Clare. David Adolph was the other receiver lined up wide. You didn't see anything from Mylan Graham or Quincy Porter, and they ended up transferring Notre Dame as a result this past offseason. So that to me is, I will believe that they could be deeper this year. I don't know if it's the deepest they've ever been in the Day era, but at least compared to last year, I think it's certainly possible.
For me, I'm interested in, because we're going to see a lot of them, of Tavian St. Clair. And I think that probably excites some fans, because as good as Julian Sand was, he's not going to play a lot. And so, St. Clair has his fans, has his supporters, and I think you'll see a lot of them. I don't know who else is. I mean, this is the first year I think you've written this. This is the first year I think since is it 2022 that they have not had a quarterback competition, a true quarterback competition. Do I have that year right?
Right. So the last couple of spring games we've seen have been somebody trying to stake their claim on that starting spot. Last year was saying Keenholz, then it was Will Howard, Devin Brown. You could quibble whether that was in a real competition, but then the year before it was Brown and McCord. So last couple of years, the starting quarterback or the presumptive starting quarterback needed to have a big day.
Yeah, and I think St. Clair is. I haven't heard a lot about him this spring. Has he been under the radar, or maybe have I just missed that? If I had my head looking elsewhere, maybe to the Jackets or the Crew.
Collapse.
Yeah, the Jackets collapse and the Crew injuries, and what's St. Clair? What's your take on him? I know we don't get to see him a lot, but it's an interesting thing, because with the transfer portal now, you have to be smart with these guys. Like, I think St. Clair has to see the field. I don't want to say substantially, but what does substantially mean? Does that mean the start of the fourth quarter every game in the blowouts? Does that mean early in the third? I'm intrigued by, what they're going to do with him, because I think they need him. Julian's saying could leave after this year.
Yeah,
correct?
he'll be eligible to enter next year's
Eligible to
draft.
leave, so you know you don't want to go into a situation where there's an unknown. Now they've done that. You know, they didn't know much about Julian saying, honestly. And it worked out pretty well for him. So it's not like you have to have experience, but in the end, I say that what happened at the end of last year? Julian Sain's lack of experience against really quality teams with power rushes, he got a little, I don't know what the word was, he got a little, he just wasn't the same. He seemed like he just was not ready for that moment against those teams. So you do want to have an opportunity to get a guy in there so he does have those moments.
Yeah,
So St. Clair,
well,
what's your thought? What's the word on him?
I think they need him to be on schedule because he's going to be their least experienced backup since Devin Brown was behind Will Howard. I think last year maybe you felt a little more comfortable with Keynotes because he had played in a Cotton Bowl, and I mean St. Clair's only played 13 snaps in his career last year against Grambling State late in that blowout. So in terms of snap counts, he's really on the low end. Did not play much because he was QB3 last year behind Keenholz. So it's a big offseason for him because he's going to be one snap away, most likely. They did bring in Justin Martin as a transfer from Maryland and UCLA, where his pass stops. But St. Clair is somebody that they need to continue to progress. And I think it'll be interesting to see just the way this will be our best look into him, just how comfortable he is, how he manages the game. He's got the physical tools on paper that you like. He's 6'4". He's a bigger quarterback than Sane with a good arm. And there was a reason he's a 5-star recruit. So the thing with him is just how does he progress mentally and just his command of the offense and sort of the intangibles of the quarterback position because the tools have always looked there when you see him in practice and they're doing quarterback drills and he zips the ball.
Do you think anyone can push um, to the receiver? Like, who do you see start? It's going to be Jeremiah Smith. What about that slot
I think
position?
Brandon Ennis is still probably your guy there.
Right. Do you think
And
he can be pushed out? And who, if so, who would it be in the slot?
they don't have well, that's why somebody like Brock Boyd is interesting to me because can he play in the slot? Um, Maybe I'm just thinking of the last guy they had from Texas at receiver, Jackson Smith-Njigba, who played quite a bit in the slot and also wore number 11. But he's 6'1", so he's kind of got the body type to do that a little bit. What's so different about this year's group of receivers, and I think you could say the same with Brock Boyd, you could say the same with the two transfers they brought in, Devin McEwen and Kyle Parker. Neither of these guys are the physical frame of somebody like Carnell Tate, who was 6'3", and Ohio State's had so many big receivers under Hartline as of late with Tate and Jeremiah and Marvin that they've really had these big bodies on the perimeter. In this year's group, all these guys are sort of roughly around 6'1". Chris Henry Jr. is the sort of the exception to that because he's 6'5", and he's taller than Jeremiah and looks like a basketball small forward. But the rest of them, it feels like they have four guys who could conceivably play slot or outside, and Parker, McEwen, and Ennis and Boyd, and so that I think is notable to me because with the new receivers coach, how does he like to move his rotation around? Hartline's been the receivers coach throughout the Day era, and maybe it stays the same. It's the same head coach, but historically Day has given his position coaches some leeway in terms of how they rotate. And so I think that's something to watch in terms of how much do they move guys from outside into the slot and how much are they willing to rotate. And that's not something we'll really truly get to assess in the season as far as the extent of the rotation, but in terms of where they're willing to position guys, I think that's going to be potentially telling if you see Brandon in this lineup outside or you see Brock Boyd in the slot and outside. So some of the positioning I think will be really relevant.
Speaking of assistant coaches, you just mentioned a few. And I don't think the spring game will reveal much about strategy or whatever, but reading your stuff, Arthur Smith, offensive coordinator, tough guy. Hearing comments about it's getting, I don't know if getting back to anymore what getting back to Big Ten football means. It probably means smash mouth a little bit, tougher. That the whole toughness issue,
It's a
you
good
know,
it's a good
that narrative is so fluid. Like, what is it?
it's a good talking point for spring. I mean, you always want your it's always good to come in and talk about being physical and
Yeah,
Big Ten football.
right. So Arthur Smith is like kind of a nuts and bolts tough guy. You know, worked for the Steelers, worked with Mike Vrabel down in Tennessee. Sort of a, I don't want to say no nonsense, but versus a Chip Kelly, who was kind of, this mad scientist thing going. Um, yeah, just
Although,
your
although
thoughts.
oddly, Arthur Smith is in some ways not too dissimilar from Chip Kelly, who was brought in with a well-versed background in running the football, and now he's
Right.
going to complement Ryan Day and Brian Hartline and the way that they had developed the passing game. I think that's the hope with Arthur Smith, somebody who's well-versed in finding ways to be creative with the running game and be heavy personnel wise. I mean, his reputation was also somebody who was able to use tight ends for better or for worse. So I think that's going to maybe help kind of balance out Ohio State's offensive philosophy. On the other hand, he was sort of asked a question early in the spring about how often to get the ball to Jeremiah Smith, and he pointed out how much they ran Derrick Henry with the Tennessee Titans when he was there. Was a 2,000-yard rusher one season there, so he is certainly not afraid of getting his premier player the ball on offense. That was a running back in the case of Henry. This is a wide receiver, so that's something to keep in mind as well. You got to kind of lean on whoever your playmakers are, but I mean that's the hope. Arthur Smith's a former offensive lineman in North Carolina, has been able to run the ball before, so I think that's one of the try to balance out what they've done passing the ball, and they need that. They need to run the ball better. They need to run the ball better, especially in the red zone, because I mean that was the if you were to write the autopsy on the 2025 Ohio State football season, it was the inability in short yardage situations in the low red zone to finish drives. That was sort of that was sort of their undoing. They could always rip off a 40-yard pass to Tate or Smith, but they needed that other something something when they got into some jams there in the red zone.
Rest in peace. What would Lou Holtz say about all that? Okay, moving to the defensive side of the ball. Um, Allegro, is that the Wisconsin guy came in?
Wisconsin transfer,
What are
and
they got some ideas how to use him. What's going on there?
they seem to think they're well. At least he has said that he's played some of the edge where he's lined up on the edge, which he didn't do a ton of at Wisconsin. He was fairly traditional last year in terms of his snaps, in terms of where they positioned him as a linebacker, but playing off ball, playing on the edge, which is sort of what Arbel Reese did, and it's hard to imagine them finding somebody with the true ceiling and skill set of Arbel Reese, but they are trying to have maybe somebody do that, and so that's something to watch as well Saturday. Just where does he line up? Is he on the edge? Is he more off the ball? Does he get a chance to rush the passer? Because that was the thing last year with Reese is it allowed Ohio State to almost at times play with 5 defensive linemen when they brought Reese down, but maybe it looked like 5 defensive linemen and he would drop into coverage, or they might walk him down at the last second in blitz where he sort of started off as they were in a 4-2 front. So I think that's the advantage of having somebody who can do the Arbel Reese stuff is it's maybe you don't have the same ceiling of Arbel, but if you have somebody who can do it well enough, it does allow you to do some of the disguises that Patricia did in
I
your
think that's, yeah, I think that's an important point you make right there is that you don't have to replace Arvell Reese with Arvell Reese. He was exceptionally elite. And their defense overall was outstanding. If you can get a guy who's even 75% of Arvell Reese, that's going to be pretty good. It's going to be good enough. I think if the rest of the defense is, up to snuff. So that's interesting that he's playing, or they may play him. Now, this may be a spring thing too, right? They could default back to just what they normally would do with a guy like Christian Allegro, right? Do I have that right? But you could put him into that Reese in situational situations, and if he's again 75-80% of what Reese was, you're going to be pretty happy with that overall.
I think to me that was sort of an open question going into spring practice. Did they have anybody in the roster who could do what Arvell did, or if you wanted to sort of play a linebacker on the edge, would you have to sort of almost move to a five down front and put somebody like Quay Rusaw, who was listed as a linebacker at Alabama, but Ohio State's having him practice with defensive ends, and he's projects a defensive end. Would you have him sort of be a third defensive and hybrid player when you went to that 5-1 look? Or now it seems like they could maybe use Allegro in that role. I think also he's been able to sort of capitalize on Riley Pettijohn, who was somebody that coming in the spring you thought he would sort of have a chance with Allegro to kind of push to be that complementary linebacker, outside linebacker alongside Peyton Pierce, who projects as the middle linebacker. That's been less of a competition because Pettijohn's been out for the spring, so we won't see him Saturday. I think that's sort of given Allegro sort of an inside track to winning that job.
Right.
And
Secondary.
Pettijohn too was somebody that we thought could maybe do some of the same things, where he's got a long frame and he's 6'2", and he can kind of do some of the same things.
He might be a little more Sonny Styles-ish, though, right?
But even Sonny Styles did some of those things too, because Patricia
Right.
brought him down as well at times.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the issue. We're not just talking about replacing Arvell Reese. We're talking about replacing Sonny Styles and Caleb Downs, which that in a way, I think that's the story of the season. Is how are you going to replace these top 10 picks, potential NFL draft picks, three guys going top 10. You're not. I mean, you're just not. So again, if you get 75% of that production and then you rotate guys in, I mean, the defense was pretty amazing last year. Up until that Miami game, when it kind of got away from them at times there in the second half, it feels like. But that's because the offense maybe wasn't doing enough. So I think that's going to be the drop off. The question is, how much drop off is there on defense? Do you have enough faith in Matt Patricia as a coach that he's going to fill the holes adequately enough to get you where you want to go?
We will see. I do think with somebody I was going to say with Arvell Reese, I mean, his status as a top 10 pick, I think, is as much to do with his potential. He's 20 years old. He's kind of scratching the surface. And it's important to keep in mind when we talk about, I think, this team and replacing guys, that his production at the end of last season really did dip. And I think he had a spectacular breakout season, not to discount any of that. But somebody like replacing Caden Curry's production will be, I think, just as important as well. Not just the top 10 ranking, but he was a wrecking ball in that Big Ten title game against Indiana. So some of those guys, regardless of draft position, I think will be just as important.
I think that's fair. That's fair. Curry, you don't see many guys take it up a notch like he did against Indiana in that Big Ten title game. He was a beast.
He's somebody I think a lot about in terms of this new NCAA proposal, 5 years to play 5. uh,
Mm.
because he and Kenyatta Jackson were part of the same recruiting class. Kenyatta redshirted as a freshman. Caden Curry did not, but he exclusively played on special teams, and I think appeared in maybe 12 games. He played in most of the games as a freshman in 22. But if you had 5 years to play five, you try to retain somebody like that, who's probably more of a mid-round pick, but incredible value at the college level for how good a pass
Mhm.
rusher is, and he's probably downgraded at the pro level because of his size. He's only about 6'3". Maybe if he was 6'5", he would go higher, or he had a longer frame. And there's also just can be a glut of pass rushers, so that's a knock against them. But I think about him where it's like they brought back Kenyatta Jackson. They if you had the 5 years to play five rule, is he back? I don't know.
Yeah, and they can get paid now.
Right,
Getting paid.
it's
That's
about the decision some of these guys have to make. It's do I go to be a fourth round pick, or do I come back and actually get pretty decently compensated with a chance to also raise my stock? So it's like insurance plus.
right. I mean, if a Gabe Cupps, who is the backup point guard for Ohio State basketball, now goes to Illinois Chicago, transferred out, was reportedly getting $600,000 to play backup point guard or backup point guard, what would a Caden Curry garner? Like he's got to be at least that, maybe 750, maybe a mil or more. I don't know. Football has a lot more money. That's a whole nother topic. But to your point, you can make pretty good money in college now. And that extra year, if you can get an extra year and make another mil or so, why not?
Not bad.
What else on defense? Uh what's the danger? What are the danger spots on defense in terms of like, well, we shall see type of thing? Corners, safeties, D line.
Oh, that's a good question because it feels like the floor for all these groups are pretty high. They brought in just a lot of guys who have played college football before on the interior, the defensive line. You have John Walker from UCF and James Smith from Alabama. You in the safety room, they added Terry Moore from Duke and Earl Little Jr. from Florida State. So it's probably a case of do they have somebody who could maybe be an elite defender, because you're losing that really at all levels. Somebody who was a first round talent at linebacker, safety, and defensive line. Can somebody really emerge? Is it somebody like Devin Sanchez, who talked about his goals? He wants to win the Jim Thorpe and he wants to be an All American. He was a former 5 star, the 6'2", bigger corner. They've liked those in the past. Davis and Ignosin was a bigger corner. Is he somebody who can emerge and really have a spectacular breakout season? Is there another Arvell Reese on the roster where they were backup before, but they're really ready to flash? And I think that's some is it maybe even somebody like Kenyatta Jackson making a big leap in his second year as a starter. It's guys like that, I think, which is for the defense going to be as important. We talk about just sort of where guys line up and how they replace guys in terms of just the identifying who the names are. But I think, and this is I think a little bit harder to judge this time of year, but is there somebody who can really sort of be a really upper tier talent on the roster? Because they are replacing a lot of first round picks, two first round linebackers, two likely top 10, maybe top five linebackers. Caden McDonald on the interior, he could be a back end of the first round, early second round pick. Safety Caleb Downs. So who can kind of emerge maybe to be the next first round pick on that side of the ball? That's the I think the open question.
Yeah, we'll find out. Spring game will be just a little glimpse of everything we've talked about. I'm just now checking the forecast. Um, and what's it say here?
There was a chance of rain earlier, but that's a moving target this time of year.
70% chance of rain, thunderstorms at noon on the 18th. 60% dropping to 60, 50, 60. Hey, it's not 100. As long as it's not like 90 and 100, because when it says 100, they're usually right on that one. You're going to get
Also,
some
what type
rain.
of rainfall you getting? Is it just spitting or is it a good soak? That's the
Oh, it looks like the little thing I'm got here has got a little lightning bolt. So that's never good. But so bring your rain gear. I don't know if they allow umbrellas in the stadium. I should probably know that, but
I bet they sell them.
oh, good one there, Joseph. Yeah.
They should. They should.
They should. They should sell them and allow them, and they should have an umbrella.
give me the
You know what? They should
3%
have an umbrella
fee.
section. So if you want to use an umbrella, you have to sit here and no one can see the game, but at least you're dry. And they charge. They charge an exorbitant rate to, would you pay $75 for an umbrella if you really needed it? Maybe you would. I don't know.
It's
Anyhow, spring game. Who is going to be the bam man?
and hey, it's on TV. It's on BTN, which is not something that it's all spring games are. Alabama had their spring game last week, and I thought about tuning in, but it wasn't on TV.
Oh, so you could stay dry in your own home and watch this baby.
Kalen DeBoer could keep his team under wraps. There's no spring portal now, so there's no spring portal window where if some second string guy really flashes that somebody could try to induce him to enter the portal and poach him. There's no risk of that. You have to wait till next January to do that. So to me, put your games on TV. Helps your fans.
There you go. They can't sell concessions that way. That's the problem. Fewer people, I should say fewer people. If it's on TV, you assume fewer people.
Get your out of state. Your fans who are out of state or out of town.
Oh yeah, good point. Good point. All right. Well, spring game 2026. It'll be a Lollapalooza for sure. That's all we got, Joe.
That's all we got. Thanks for joining us, and hope you enjoy the scrimmage on Saturday. We'll have more to recap it in your podcast feeds next week, and we'll have more immediately after the game on dispatch.com. Thanks for joining us.